All right, hello everybody. Today I've got something for you. I am going to go through bit by bit because it's a long enough story that I can't do it all in one day or one sitting. So today I'm going to go through the first two chapters of the first story that was published in the first issue of Weird Tales. Now, Weird Tales magazine had its first issue in March of 1923. The first story is called The Dead Man's Tale by Willard E. Hawkins. And you might recognize Weird Tales as the magazine that published a lot of Lovecraft, a lot of Robert E. Howard, a lot of Robert Bloch, etc., etc., etc. Lots of great authors published in Weird Tales. Weird Tales, in its original incarnation, was advertised as a place for what they called, quote, goose flesh stories, and there's a page in the first issue that's like, yeah, most magazines don't want to publish these spooky, scary stories, but we're going to give it a shot and see what happens. Weird Tales had a lot of financial troubles over the years, of course, but managed to keep going for a pretty long time, and they've had some hiatuses, but I think they're still actually working, under new management kind of thing. But anyway. What will follow here is the first two chapters of this story, The Dead Man's Tale. It's a moderate length little story. I'm probably going to do it in like 4 parts, and so just kind of be something that I put together a few minutes of whenever I get a chance. The Dead Man's Tale by Willard E. Hawkins. The curious narrative that follows was found among the papers of the late Dr. John Pedrick, psychical investigator and author of occult works. It bears evidences of having been received through automatic writing, as were several of his publications. Unfortunately, there are no records to confirm this assumption, and none of the mediums or assistants employed by him in his research work admits knowledge of it. Possibly, for the doctor was reputed to possess some psychic powers, it may have been received by him. At any rate, the lack of data renders the recital useless as a document for the Society for Psychical Research. It is published for whatever intrinsic interest or significance it may possess. With reference to the names mentioned, it may be added that they are not confirmed by the records of the War Department. It could be maintained, however, that purposely fictitious names were substituted either by the doctor or the communicating entity. They called me, when I walked the earth in a body of dense matter, Richard Devaney. Though my story has little to do with the war, I was killed in the Second Battle of the Marne on July 24th, 1918. Many times, as men were wont to do who felt the daily, hourly imminence of death in the trenches, I had pictured that event in my mind and wondered what it would be like. Mainly, I had inclined toward a belief in total extinction, that, when the vigorous, full-blooded body I possessed should lie bereft of its faculties, I, as a creature apart from it, should go on, was beyond credence. The play of life through the human machine, I reasoned, was like the flow of gasoline into the motor of an automobile. Shut off that flow, and the motor became inert, dead, while the fluid which had given it power was in itself nothing. And so, I confess, it was a surprise to discover that I was dead, and yet not dead. I did not make the discovery at once. There had been a blinding concussion, a moment of darkness, a sensation of falling into a deep abyss. An indefinite time afterward, I found myself standing dazedly on the hillside, toward the crest of which we had been pressing against the enemy. The thought came that I must have momentarily lost consciousness, yet now I felt strangely free from physical discomfort. What had I been doing when that moment of blackness blotted everything out? I had been dominated by a purpose, a flaming desire. Like a flash, recollection burst upon me, and with it a blaze of hatred, not toward the Boche gunners ensconced in the woods above us, but toward the private enemy I had been about to kill. It had been the opportunity for which I had waited interminable days and nights. In the open formation, he kept a few paces ahead of me. As we alternately ran forward, then dropped on our bellies and fired, I had watched my chance. No one would suspect, with the dozens who were falling every moment under the merciless fire from the trees beyond, that the bullet which ended Lewis Winston's career came from a comrade's rifle. Twice I had taken aim, but withheld my fire. Not from indecision, but lest in my vengeful heat I might fail to reach a vital spot. When I raised my rifle the third time, he offered a fair target. God, how I hated him! With fingers itching to speed the steel toward his heart, I forced myself to remain calm, to hold fire for that fragment of a second that would ensure careful aim. Then, as the pressure of my finger tightened against the trigger, came the blinding flash, the moment of blackness. 2. I had evidently remained unconscious longer than I realized. Save for a few figures that lay motionless or squirming in agony on the field, the regiment had passed on, to be lost in the trees at the crest of the hill. With a pang of disappointment, I realized that Lewis would be among them. Involuntarily, I started onward, driven still by that impulse of burning hatred when I heard my name called. Turning in surprise, I saw a helmeted figure crouching beside something huddled in the tall grass. No second glance was needed to tell me that the huddled something was the body of a soldier. I had eyes only for the man who was bending over him. Fate had been kind to me. It was Lewis. Apparently, in his preoccupation, he had not noticed me. Coolly, I raised my rifle and fired. The result was startling. Lewis neither dropped headlong nor looked up at the report. Vaguely, I questioned whether there had been a report. Thwarted, I felt the lust to kill mounting in me with redoubled fury. With rifle upraised, I ran toward him. A terrific swing, and I crashed the stock against his head. It passed clear through. Lewis remained unmoved. Uncomprehending, snarling, I flung the useless weapon away and fell upon him with bare hands, with fingers that strained to rend and tear and strangle. Instead of encountering solid flesh and bone, they too passed through him. Was it a mirage, a dream? Had I gone crazy? Sobered, for a moment forgetful of my fury, I drew back and tried to reduce the thing to reason. Was Lewis but a figment of the imagination, a phantom? My glance fell upon the figure beside which he was sobbing incoherent words of entreaty. I gave a start, then looked more closely. The dead man, for there was no question about his condition with a bloody shrapnel wound in the side of his head, was myself. Gradually the import of this penetrated my consciousness. Then I realized that it was Lewis who had called my name, that even now he was sobbing it over and over. The irony of it struck me at the moment of realization. I was dead. I was the phantom, who had meant to kill Lewis. I looked at my hands, my uniform. I touched my body. Apparently I was as substantial as before the shrapnel buried itself in my head. Yet, when I had tried to grasp Lewis, my hands seemed to encompass only space. Lewis lived, and I was dead. The discovery for a time benumbed my feeling toward him. With impersonal curiosity, I saw him close the eyes of the dead man, the man who, somehow or another, had been me. I saw him search the pockets and draw forth a letter I had written only that morning, a letter addressed to... With a sudden surge of dismay, I darted forward to snatch it from his hands. He should not read that letter. Again I was reminded of my impalpability. But Lewis did not open the envelope, although it was unsealed. He read the superscription, kissed it as sobs rent his frame, and thrust the letter inside his khaki jacket. "Dick, buddy," he cried brokenly. "Best pal man ever had. How can I take this news back to her?" My lips curled. To Lewis I was his pal, his buddy. Not a suspicion of the hate I bore him, had borne him ever since I discovered in him a rival for Velma Roth. Oh, I had been clever. It was our unselfish friendship that endeared us both to her. A sign of jealousy, of ill nature, and I would have forfeited the paradise of her regard that apparently I shared with Lewis. I had never felt secure of my place in that paradise. True, I could always awaken a response in her, but I must put forth effort in order to do so. He held her interest, it seemed, without trying. They were happy with each other and in each other. Our relations might be expressed by likening her to the water of a placid pool, Lewis to the basin that held her, me to the wind that swept over it. By exerting myself, I could agitate the surface of her nature into ripples of pleasurable excitement, could even lash her emotions into a tempest. She responded to the stimulation of my mood, yet in my absence settled contentedly into the peaceful comfort of Lewis's steadfast love. I felt vaguely then, and am certain now with a broader perspective toward realities, that Velma intuitively recognized Lewis as her mate, yet feared to yield herself to him because of my sway over her emotional nature. When the Great War came, we all, I am convinced, felt that it would absolve Velma from the task of choosing between us. Whether the agony that spoke from the violet depths of her eyes when we said goodbye was chiefly for Lewis or me, I could not tell. I doubt if she could have done so. But in my mind was the determination that only one of us should return. And Lewis would not be that one. Did I feel no repugnance at thought of murdering the man who stood in my way? Very little. I was a savage at heart, a savage in whom desire outweighed anything that might stand in the way of gaining its object. From my point of view, I would have been a fool to pass the opportunity. Why I should have so hated him, a mere obstacle in my path, I do not know. It may have been due to oppressions of the intangible barrier his blood would always raise between Velma and me, or to a slumbering sense of remorse. But, speculation aside, here I was, in a state of being that the world calls death, while Lewis lived, was free to return home, to claim Velma, to flaunt his possession of all that I held precious. It was maddening. Must I stand idly by, helpless to prevent this? All right, that was fun. Pretty good hook for a story. Good quality for the first story in the first issue of the famous Weird Tales magazine. What I'll note is that if you are looking very carefully, you will note that there is a bit of there's quite a decent amount of typographical errors in the text that I have, at least the JPEGs that I have from archive.org, and so clearly the editing could have used a little bit more polish, but they did end up publishing these stories that supposedly were commercially unviable, and that's kind of a neat little new market that they started to explore. And of course, it ended up as a place for Lovecraft, Howard, Block, etc. to write. So yeah, I will probably be doing one more video this week. I have an idea, and it'll just depend on whether I can actually get it done in time. Have a good rest of your week, and I'll see you next time.